It is the year 40 AD. The Roman Empire is enormous, and sitting at the top of it is Emperor Caligula. Caligula has a plan. He wants to invade Britain, because apparently conquering most of Europe wasn't enough. He looks at the map and basically thinks, okay, what's next? Britain. So Caligula and his army march north. Thousands of Roman soldiers. Weapons, ready. Armor, ready. Army, ready. Everyone is expecting a battle. And eventually, they reach the sea. So far, everything is completely normal. Britain is on the other side. The Roman army is standing at the edge of the world, ready for some glorious conquest. Except, something goes wrong. We don't actually know exactly what happened during Caligula's British expedition. The ancient sources give us a pretty strange story. According to the Roman writer Suetonius, Caligula eventually ordered his soldiers to collect seashells. Yes, seashells. Imagine being a Roman soldier. You've spent weeks marching with heavy armor, you've got a sword, you've got a shield, you're expecting to fight the Britons, and then your emperor says, forget the battle, go pick up those shells. And apparently, they did. But why? According to Suetonius, Caligula treated the shells as spoils from the ocean. In other words, these weren't just random shells. They were apparently being presented as war trophies. Now, this is where the story gets really weird. Because people today often summarize the whole thing like this, Caligula declared war on the ocean. And honestly, that's an incredible headline, but there's a problem. The ancient sources don't actually say that Caligula stood on the beach, pulled out his sword, and attacked the ocean. That's probably a later exaggeration of what happened. What Suetonius does tell us is that Caligula brought his army to the coast, prepared for military action, and then had his soldiers collect seashells. Did he literally fight the ocean? Probably not. But did something extremely strange happen on that beach? Apparently, yes. And it gets even stranger, because Caligula's British campaign didn't end with Rome conquering Britain. There was no massive Roman victory, no conquered island, no defeated British army being dragged back to Rome. Instead, Caligula eventually turned around, and that's when the seashell story becomes even more ridiculous. Because imagine returning to Rome after a military campaign. Everyone is expecting news of a glorious victory. Did you conquer Britain? No. Did you defeat a huge army? No. So, what did you bring back? Caligula, these seashells. And apparently, these shells were presented as the spoils of his campaign. Which raises one very important question. Why would a Roman emperor do this? Was Caligula actually insane? Was he punishing his soldiers? Was he trying to turn a failed campaign into a victory? Or was the whole story exaggerated by ancient writers who already wanted people to think Caligula was completely insane? And this is where the story gets much more interesting, because Caligula wasn't simply the ridiculous cartoon villain that later stories make him seem. The real story behind the war against the ocean is much more complicated, and the answer might actually have less to do with the ocean and more to do with Caligula himself. So why would Caligula do something like this? Because, at first glance, it sounds completely insane. You're the emperor of Rome. You have one of the most powerful armies in the ancient world. You're standing on the coast of Britain, and instead of conquering the island, you're collecting seashells. But the real story is probably more complicated. The biggest problem is that our main sources about Caligula were written after his death. One of the most famous is Suetonius, and Suetonius absolutely loved telling stories about Caligula's bizarre behavior. He describes him as cruel, unpredictable, arrogant, and completely out of control. So historians have to be careful. Because when an ancient writer tells you, yeah, this emperor was so crazy that he made his army collect seashells, you have to ask, did this really happen exactly like that? Or did the story become more dramatic over time? We don't have a Roman soldier standing on the beach writing, "Dear Diary, today the emperor made us collect shells. I have no idea what's happening. Unfortunately, history forgot to give us that document." But the seashell story itself isn't completely random. Suetonius really does describe Caligula ordering his soldiers to collect shells. He even says Caligula considered them spoils from the ocean. So something strange probably happened. The question is, what did it mean? One possibility is that Caligula was trying to create the appearance of victory. Think about it. A Roman emperor was expected to be a successful military commander. Conquest meant prestige. Victory meant glory, and a successful campaign could eventually lead to a massive triumph back in Rome. But Caligula's British expedition didn't produce the spectacular conquest everyone might have expected. So what do you do when you don't have a spectacular victory? Well, You find some trophies, and apparently, the ocean was willing to cooperate. Another possibility is that the whole thing was meant to humiliate the soldiers. Some ancient accounts suggest that Caligula's troops were reluctant to continue the campaign. If the soldiers refused to fight, ordering them to collect seashells could have been a punishment or a way of mocking them. Basically, you don't want to fight? Fine. Go collect shells. Imagine explaining that to your family when you get home. So, how was the campaign? Pretty good. Did you fight the Britons? No. What did you do? I collected shells for the emperor. But there's another possibility. Maybe Caligula wasn't literally claiming that he had defeated the ocean at all. Maybe the shells had a symbolic meaning. The Romans had a long tradition of displaying strange and impressive objects as evidence of their victories. The ocean represented the edge of the known world. So collecting its shells could have been a theatrical way of saying, we reached the end of the world. That would actually make more sense than, I have defeated water. And this is why the famous phrase, Caligula declared war on the ocean, needs a little caution. It's funny, it's memorable, and it's perfect for the internet, but it isn't exactly what our ancient sources tell us. The sources describe a bizarre military spectacle involving the sea, the army, and seashells. The war against the ocean version is largely the modern interpretation. Still, even if Caligula didn't literally fight the sea, his campaign was certainly strange. And then there is one final detail. When Caligula returned to Rome, he didn't simply disappear and pretend nothing had happened. According to Suetonius, he presented the shells as the spoils of the ocean. And that tells us something important. Maybe the real story isn't Caligula was so stupid that he fought the ocean. Maybe it's Caligula had a disastrous or incomplete campaign and turned it into a performance. And honestly, that's almost more interesting. Because this wasn't just about military power, it was about image. Caligula needed to look like a victorious emperor, so if Britain wasn't conquered, at least he had something to show. Thousands of years later, that tiny detail became one of the most famous stories about Caligula. And now, whenever someone says, "What is the dumbest war in history?" someone inevitably brings up Caligula and his greatest enemy, the ocean. Did he actually declare war on it? Probably not. Did his soldiers collect seashells? According to our ancient source, yes. And did Caligula somehow turn a beach full of seashells into a Roman military achievement? Well, that's the kind of historical flop we live for. The Romans conquered empires. Caligula, he conquered the beach. And if you enjoyed watching Caligula conquer the beach, consider subscribing and leaving a like. It helps us make more historical disasters. See you in the next flop.